Good Friday morning. Tim Radford here on WKRK 105.5 FM, 1320 AM, cable TV channel 25, and worldwide we're at country.am. It's time for our weekly program with Sheriff Derek Palmer from the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office. And this show we do every weekly, each week, unscripted, unprepared, and sometimes uncalled for. So I hear Greg Goodman using that line on the morning show from time to time, and sometimes just uncalled for. But welcome back, Sheriff.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, we've had a little chilly week.
We have. We've been needing to try to thaw out a little bit, but it looks like we've got good temperatures coming up for the next week. So hopefully we'll get thawed out a little bit. I think there was one day, looking over there, I think it's 23 on Saturday, but everything else is above freezing for the rest of the week, I believe.
Yeah, so that's the overnight temperature tonight between Friday and Saturday. I'd like to move those bottom numbers over just a half a slot.
Right.
So, yeah, it's 54 today, 23 tonight, and then Saturday be 58 tomorrow, somewhere right around. But, we've had quite a little snow, and the snow really wasn't the problem this time. It was the freezing temperatures that things would melt and freeze back over, and that's one of the reasons our schools were closed most of the week this week. And we fared pretty well there. I shared a post from the State Highway Patrol, and across the state during this week from one 15-hour period or 16-hour period, they were averaging about 100 wrecks an hour across the state of North Carolina.
We did very well here. I think most people stayed home here. I think, which was it yesterday or the day before? My days are running together. The first day of snow. I think it's the day before.
I think it was the day before yesterday.
I think we only had like 4 or 5 wrecks that day.
Wow.
And that was good because I think most people stayed at home, didn't come out. Yesterday morning, I took. Like I say, my days are running together. I don't remember if it was yesterday before, but one day I took my wife to work. The county offices were closed, but she had some work to do that she needed to get done, so I drove her out there and dropped her off, and I went on to work and did some stuff myself. But I noticed that on that day there was not hardly anybody on the roads. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, when I picked her up that evening and went to eat dinner before we went home, we went to the Mexican restaurant in Murphy, and when we were in there was only like 3 other people in the restaurant, and that's very unusual, at dinner time for a restaurant in Murphy. So,
wow.
But I think most people stayed home. Most people tried to just stay out of the cold temperatures, stay off the ice, and it worked out well. We only had just a few wrecks. So.
That's good. Hopefully no serious wrecks, just fender benders.
Fender benders, sliding off in the ditch, off banks, those kind of things. But I don't think no one was seriously injured.
I think with technology changes today with smartphones and Facebook and radio and TV, I think we're all working together to do a better job getting the message out of how dangerous driving on snow is.
And like I say, I know, we have 14 different weather models they choose from.
Right.
And
it gets a little confusing.
Information together and all those kind of things, but I still find it amazing that 3 days ahead of time they could tell us the snow would be in Murphy at approximately 3 to 5 on Tuesday evening, and you get about this amount, and that's exactly what happened. And I just think that's amazing they can tell you that 3 days ahead of time.
It really is. Sometimes it doesn't pan out, but then sometimes it's right on target. But just to be able to use all the information and just be able to schedule an event like this to help prepare people.
Right.
So it really is amazing.
Yeah, and there's so many variables that go into those weather forecasts. It is just amazing that they can even get it close, much less hit it right on.
I remember back in the old days when I worked for the radio station here in high school back in the 89 to 91 area. We had our weather forecast was from the North Carolina News Network, and they had zones. So Murphy, our WKRK was in the mountain zone. So that basically covered from Murphy to up around Mount Mitchell in those areas. So not a
weather can be drastically different in Mount Mitchell than it can be here.
The same with Asheville too, but it was this whole big zone. So there are like 5 zones in the state, and we aired it back. But now the forecast is tailored basically to our basic listing area with Cherokee County and the surrounding counties there. So we're able to customize that a lot more than back in the old days.
Yeah. And, the thing about it is we talked about ice. There's still ice around. There's still ice on the roads. And one of the things we hear constantly all the time is why the schools make the decisions they make and why they do what they do. But and I know a lot of people's wondering why schools are closed again today, but there are still ice around. And one of the things that the schools do is what the deputies are out riding around, and school personnel also are out riding some of these bus routes that go, especially up toward Topton, that go out Hanging Dog and those areas, that go out toward Wolf Creek and the outline areas, and they ride these bus routes and evaluate the roads and what kind of conditions they're in. So things may be very clear, very open here in the town of Murphy, but when you get in some of these outline areas, they can still be covered in ice and snow. And so the school has to take those things into consideration too when choosing whether to do delays or closing schools or things of that nature.
It's not an easy choice when you're trying to make decisions on school closings, because like you said, our county it's a large amount of land. And just because it's your driveway is clear doesn't mean someone a few miles away.
Right.
I know. So my driveway, the parts that where the trees are cut and the sun gets to it, the steepest part of my driveway is clear.
Right.
But down at the very bottom where it's shady, still iced over.
Yeah.
But I was able to make it over that ice this morning.
And on a good day, on a sunny day, there are children that's on school buses for an hour or longer that has to be there early in the morning to get on a bus, and they're getting off the bus an hour after school's over. So when you think about that and adding snow-covered roads and icy roads and stuff to that, even if it is passable that the buses can get through, that to slow down even more than what they normally do. So you're putting those children extended periods of times on buses, and you got kids standing out in single-digit weather and teen weather waiting for a bus. And so those things are taken into consideration too. Sometimes it even though road conditions plays the majority of the part in whether school happens or not, sometimes the superintendent and the school system has to take in consideration just the temperatures.
Right, and the wind chills associated with that temperature.
So if you've got a teen's temperature and the wind chill puts it down to 0 or single digits, then sometimes the school will make a decision to do delays and things based on just the temperatures that are outside and not necessarily on the condition of the roads.
All right. Let's see. Well, I know 2017 was a pretty busy year for the sheriff's office in call volume.
Yeah.
Tell us what kind of, first of all, the call volume, what kind of the numbers and what kind of calls are taking most of the time.
Well, it's back up. In 2014, when I took over, we were answering about 20,000 calls a year, a little bit over 20,000. I think it's 21,000 something for that first year when I took over 2014 into 15. Then it grew a little bit as the casino opened, and we're starting to get more volumes. And I've got a chart that I keep at my office about the call volumes and stuff that I prepare every month. But you can see the growth that's happened. And this past year in 2017, in just 3 years, we went from answering 20,000 calls to in 2017 we answered 38,885 calls, and so just a few calls shy of 40,000 calls for the year. And so when you think about that and putting that in perspective, you think about that we have 16 patrol officers, we have 4 narcotics officers, and about 6 investigative personnel in detention. And then we have a few administrators around. But when we have about 30 sworn officers somewhere in that area, and those 30 sworn officers did over 40,000 calls for the year. That's a lot of calls for that amount of people.
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
And plus you do so much more than just patrol.
Right. And like I say, not all of those is responding to 911 calls. Some of those are things like security checks and extra patrols and things that we do for our community. And that's always a debate. Some people say, well, you can't count them, you shouldn't count those as calls for service. But the fact of the matter is somebody's taking time out of their day, a citizen is taking time out of their day to call the sheriff's office and request you to come to their house and patrol it and check it, or their business or whatever it may be. And so I count that as still a call for service because they've requested it. They've asked us to do that. Right. And so those things are tabulated into it as they were in 14, 15. But one of the things that we have done that beginning year, I talked to the commissioners about this whole, when we talk about numbers, is we really do a better job of documenting things and tracking things than we used to. So to say call volume has actually doubled, even though that is what the numbers show and show on paper, it's probably a little bit short of doubled, because back when we originally took over, there wasn't a good job of tracking those calls and a good job of documenting all those things. So we do a very, very good job of doing that, do a lot better now. And we've actually got some people coming out from the federal government helping us to do crime scene mapping and able to track our call volumes and where the majority of the calls happen, what time of day they happen, what parts of the community they're happening in, and those type of things. So that helps us better to put our patrol efforts where we need to put those.
All right. Let's see. A couple of weeks ago, there was a meeting at the commissioner's office, and there was a lot of detention officers. I think we touched on this last week, and that was about the concerns about pay for our You mentioned that you're not at odds with the commissioners. They've done a lot to help your department, your office, and can you give us a status update on that?
We can. The commission meeting, the last meeting in January, is actually postponed to the February meeting. So hopefully we'll find out something in the February meeting as to what they're going to be able to do as far as helping us with the pay issues. And like I say, reiterate again, the commissioners have been very good to my office. They have been very good to work with. They have helped us try to get, as people remember and recall when they go back to when I first took over in 2014, we had a dilapidated car fleet that the average mile on a car was 230,000 miles per car. So when you have a patrol car that you're running hard 24 hours a day, 230,000 miles is a lot of miles to have on a car for be driving high speeds and things of that nature. So the commission board worked very well with us on trying to develop a plan on getting those cars up to par and what we needed, and we have developed last year and continuing to work on a plan of rotating cars in and out, how many we need per year to keep that fleet up to date, those kind of things. So they have been very good about giving us the monies and the things we need to get our office where it needs to be. But unfortunately, one of the things, and it's not just the sheriff's office, I mean it's countywide, is that we have an issue with pay countywide to where people are below for their jobs where everybody else in the state is and what everybody else in the state is getting paid for their jobs. And a lot of things go into that as far as considering that, as far as your tax base, as far as your income, your general income of your population. We do understand that we're in a rural county that's one of the poorer counties in the state. So we realistically can't say we need the same pay as somebody in Charlotte-Mecklenburg's making, because they have different resources, they have different pay structures, tax rates, and income and things there. So all those things have to be taken into consideration also. But what we have done is not just myself, I know, but the county manager has also done it, and other department heads have done this, is looked at counties around the state that's like size, like population, like land mass, like tax base, that's kind of very similar to Cherokee County, and taking about 10 of those closest counties we could find that's similar to Cherokee County and look at where they're paying their people, where their salaries are, things of that nature, and seeing how we compare with those counties. And what we have found is overall countywide, we are far behind what other counties are making and other counties are paying. So those are all things that has to be taken in consideration when you talk about pay. We found that our detention officers on that average that we looked at was averaging about $1.57 less on average as what other detention officers around the state were making for those like counties. And so one of the things I had talked to the commission board about was, even if we can't get to that place where they need to be equal with other counties, we need to start putting things in place to progress to there. We need to start implementing steps and implementing things to get our people where they need to be. And those are things, like I say, that the commissioners not only take in consideration for the sheriff's office and detention center and 911 and all that, but they have to take in consideration countywide. And so they have to take in consideration also what they do for one office. They have to look at other offices and other departments and other places as they're trying to make those pays equal also. And so, but fortunately for us, or unfortunately for the county, however you want to describe that, like I told the commission board, I'm not there to fight for health department, or I'm not there to fight for the EMS or DSS or any of these other offices. I run the sheriff's office, so I'm there to fight for my people and try to get what I can for my people. So we just want to try to make sure that our people are compensated for the work they do and the danger that they're put in every day. And And anything the commission board would be willing to give us and to work with us, we greatly appreciate.
And a lot of that is not just to give more pay. Well, that is a big part, but
Right.
is to retain the employees.
Retain the employee. Yeah.
And that's very important, is to make sure that once you fully train an employee, that they don't just go somewhere else for more money.
Well, one thing that's a little bit different with law enforcement, detention center, dispatch, EMS, DSS, health department, those type of entities, that service-based entities. One thing that's different is we have to obtain certifications to do our job. And once we get those certifications to do our job, then we have to maintain those certifications every year to keep doing our job. And so for law enforcement, for example, once you get your basic certification through the state, you have to do on the law enforcement side, I think it's 24 hours of in-service every year of classroom work that you have to do to maintain that certification. And when you're putting forth this effort to maintain that certification, and not just your basic needs, but you're going to additional schools, you're going to investigative schools, you're going to patrol schools, you're going to supervisor schools, you're gaining all these other certifications and trainings while you're doing that, you become marketable across the state.
Right.
And so what happens is that other sheriff's offices, other police departments, they see good officers that's been trained and getting all these certifications. And where, like, for example, in Cherokee County, where we may have an officer that's worked for 3 years or 3.5 years, and they're up to about $14.50, $14.80 an hour, that's what they're making, but they've got all these certifications. You may have someone like Cherokee Indian Police or another county nearby or another police department come in and say, I want that officer because he's a good officer, and if you'll come work for me, I'll give you $16 or $17 an hour to come work for me. And so that is not necessarily the deciding factor when you have older officers that's invested in the community and lived here for a long time. But when you have younger officers that are developing families, having children, that are trying to raise a family and make payments, I don't blame them to go where the money's at, so they can do the same job here or they can do it over at Cherokee, and they get paid another $2 an hour over there at Cherokee. So
when that happens, how does that make you feel as sheriff, after you've gotten someone to that point that you want them to be at?
Well, it's a little disheartening as far as the office, as far as trying to retain people and keep people, because obviously you want the best people you can get and you want the best office you can have.
Exactly.
But on a personal level, I've always told my people, if you can better yourself or you can better your family, I'm not going to be mad at you or hold it against you. If you're leaving my office to go somewhere else where you can better yourself and better your family, then I'll be in support of that. I'll support you in doing that. Where things that really are disheartening personal is when people get mad or upset or leave for personal reasons, or they just don't like policy, or they just don't like the way you're doing things, or just don't like you personally. Those can be a little disheartening on a personal level. Right. But as far as if people are leaving to better themselves or better their family, I have no qualms with that. I want people to do the best they can for themselves.
All right. And on an unrelated note from the sheriff's office, you've been doing some research in genealogy and history, and you're a pretty big history buff, aren't you?
I love history. I love looking. My wife gets so aggravated at me because when I'm home for the night trying to relax, the TV is on some type of Discovery Channel, History Channel, something where it's talking about all the things that's happened through history and all that, and she gets kind of put out with me sometimes about that. She says, can't we watch something else, because she finds it boring, but I love it. I love history. But no, several years ago, I started doing some genealogy stuff and just doing my background, my family history type thing. And I was amazed when I started digging into it. I have an Indian line that comes from my dad's side of the family that comes into the Bird clan over in Cherokee and goes through the Owl family, and it branches out into other families there in the Indian line, and that's where I really started, and I found that fascinating, with some of the history and stuff there. But I started adding my whole family to it and looking back at things, and I was very surprised at the amount of families in the area that our family is actually related to, like the Sneeds and the Dockerys and several people down in the Hanging Dog area. Families down in that area that were related to family-wise. And so, I just started digging in it more and more. And then my mother's family is from over in Clay County, from the Shooting Creek area, and kind of the Andersons and the Ingalls over there. And So digging into all that, and I started branching these things back, and I've actually got one line of my family all the way back to the 1100s now, over in Ireland and Great Britain and all those kind of things. And so it's just been fascinating to me to look into that, to follow your family history all the way back through there. But when doing that, I ran across some newspaper articles and doing some searches, and it's kind of branched out my history taste, I guess you might say, into just things that's happened in the area. Just looking back at things that's happened to Murphy and Hanging Dog, and I was reading a story in the early 1900s and one of the newspaper articles about revenuers down in Hanging Dog taking some whiskey stills and getting in a shootout and shooting a guy down there, and then I had the whole trial, was printed in the paper, and reading all the testimony of the witnesses and all that, and I just really started digging into this and finding that. And of course, you can't do that without looking into Sheriff Crawford, that got shot, and the newspaper articles there, and Matt Carringer in the 30s, the police chief, and reading all those stories and how all that happened. And I just found it fascinating. But I ran across an article, was actually in 1892. And I for some reason, this article just stood out to me for whatever reason. And it was written in 1892 by the Charlotte Observer.
It was 2 years before you were born.
Yeah, maybe. And about a guy in the area. This was actually November 29th of 1892. And the headline reads, "Bill Murphy, the notorious desperado, is still alive." And I thought, that's interesting. Let me read that and see what that has to say. So as I was reading this article, I'm just going to read it to you. It's very short. It says, "Bill Murphy, the noted desperado who was reported shot to death several months ago, is alive and hiding in the Nantahala Mountains. Persons from that region say he is terrorizing the entire country and levying contributions for the support of himself and his gang. For 30 years, Murphy has been a terror on the borderline of Tennessee and North Carolina. His father before him, who married a Cherokee squaw, made the rifle his only law. And in 1862, with half a dozen companions, he rode into town." I'm assuming he's talking about Murphy here. I don't know this for a fact. But it says, with a half a dozen companions, he rode into town, took possession of it, and held it for several days. Bill was a boy of only 15 then when he did that.
Oh, wow.
He followed in his father's footsteps. The gang always kept on the outer edge of civilization, have nothing to do with people from a distance, and keeping their tongues of those silent by threats. The first break in the family was when George Murphy was about to marry a girl whom Bill wanted himself. He shot George dead while on his way to the wedding, forced the guests to bury the dead man, and then shot the girl's brother dead when he objected to the proceedings. A sheriff's posse which sought Bill soon after this was routed and one of them killed. Fear of treachery, after having made this break in his own ranks, forced him into the Nantahala Mountains, where his gang has been reorganized, and no one dare go near him. And I thought that was a neat little article about things in our area and things that happen here. When you think about desperados and gangs and shootouts and all these things here, you think about the West.
The old Western movies.
Yeah, you think about Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and California and, and all those areas out in there, and you don't think about those same type of things were going on here in the mountains of North Carolina,
Could you imagine being the sheriff back in those days with the resources they had available to them?
Well, and from my research that I did in the 1800s and earlier, basically there was only one law enforcement officer, and that was the sheriff. And what happened was, like this Bill Murphy that you go after, you just went out and grabbed people off the street and deputized them and said, let's go get him. You know? And so there was only really one law enforcement officer, and everybody else was what they called the posse. And so evidently this Bill Murphy was such a notorious criminal that everybody was afraid of that they just left him in the mountains because nobody wanted to go near him. and I thought that was pretty neat.
That is interesting.
Article.
Now you have me interested in researching all my family history,
right?
Now, so I have to go back.
Yeah, and I don't think I was related to this Bill Murphy in any way. I just think that it was just a neat little story.
That was a pretty cool story
that I found, and it made me wonder. And I'm not trying to tag anybody with anything, but it kind of made me wonder. Because it talked about the border of North Carolina and Tennessee mountains is where they roamed. And I know down in the Unaka Violet area, we still have families down there that's last name was Murphy. And so I was wondering if it might not have been related to some of those folks down there.
It is quite possible.
Yeah. And but I found those kind of things very interesting. And one of the things, one of my detention officers was going through a thrift shop the other day and found a Bible in a thrift shop that had a list of Palmers in it from the 1800s and before. And so she brought it to me and she said, "Here, I found this in a thrift shop." And some of the names I recognized in it, and they were people that lived here around Murphy and in their area. Still trying to determine whether they were my actual family members or not, or an offshoot of my family. But just in a thrift shop, just finding a Bible from the 1800s with family names and stuff in it. I thought, how neat that is to find that kind of stuff.
That is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked about the sheriff's office. We've had a history lesson, and just you never know what you're going to get on the show.
Oh, no, you never know. It's
That's
just
right.
a variety show.
A variety show. There's no telling what's going to happen next week when
we
you
may
return.
have Town Sing next week. Rick.
Yeah, I'll bring my karaoke machine, and we'll just give a nice treat through song.
Right. A funny little story about that before we go. I think of my mom when I heard this morning. There was somebody requested to turn your radio on. And my dad used to sing that all the time, and my mom hated that song. She did not want to hear it. She didn't want anybody singing it. She
Turn the radio on.
Yeah, she did not. And I thought when they requested that song this morning, I thought I would get on the radio today and sing that to my mom.
You should. I should dedicate that to her, too, when I play it this afternoon.
There you go. Yeah, play
All
it for her. Barbara Palmer.
Barbara Palmer, turn your radio on.
Yeah.
And I'm playing that for the Rapers and for Barbara Palmer today. Okay, and that's actually my next request when we get back to our request songs.
Yeah.
All right, Sheriff, I see our time has quickly gotten away from us. Is there anything you wanted to cover that we haven't mentioned today?
No, just like I say, I'm glad to see the warm weather coming. It is supposed to rain on Monday. But the thing about it is, with all this froze ground we've had for so long, and then rain coming in on top of it, just be careful out there, because shoulders of highways and getting off of sides of roads and stuff will be very, very soft. So people have the likelihood of getting stuck if you get off the pavement. So just pay attention to that.
All right. Stay tuned. We'll have Pastor Odd Brown coming up in just a moment. I think I saw him coming in the the office with his tape in. We'll have his program coming up in just a moment. And Sheriff, thank you very much for being with us on this Friday. I still want to say it's Monday for some reason.
My days have been all messed up.
I asked Helen Long this morning how her weekend was. She goes, "I'm not crazy. I haven't had the weekend yet." I said, I was just making sure that you were paying attention to me. I had to play that off. All right. It's WKRK Radio in Murphy, North Carolina, 105.5 FM, 1320 AM, cable TV channel 25, and worldwide we're at country.am.